Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly edition of All Aboard, weekly tip number 7. And so what we are going to be talking about today is how we deal with a struggling LSP, LSA, or producer in our agency. So it does not matter what the role is. They can be a sales producer, they can be a customer service person, they can be an admin, right? But we all should have standards and goals for our employees. Otherwise, how do they know that they're doing a great job? So what happens when they're not hitting those standards or they're not living up to the goals that they have? What do we do in that situation? I think what a lot of us do are get frustrated. We tend to latch on and start to micromanage. I think most entrepreneurs tend to be control freaks. I know I am. And so one of the ways to not micromanage is to have a plan, is to take action. And one of the tools that we love to use in our agency is the performance improvement plan. Okay. And so performance improvement plans get a really bad rap by employees. They think it's just a kind of a corporate box that they're checking to fire you. That's not the case. And I will talk about that a lot, right? But the best thing that we can do is get a performer or a producer back on track rather than fire them and replace them. So we'll dive in today. I'll walk you through it. I'll tell you how we handle performance improvement plans and how we get people back on track. Let's dive in. All right, everybody, let's jump into the deck. Okay. So again, thank you for your patience with me. I'm traveling this week, and so I'm in a hotel room. I don't have my normal setup, and my mic quality might not be as good. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit louder, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit closer to my screen. So as we talked about it in the intro, what we are talking about today is using performance improvement plans to help improve the performance of somebody who might not be hitting goals or might not even be meeting basic standards in your agency. And again, just to talk about it, right? Why would we want to use PIPs? Well, there's a lot of reasons that we're going to go into today, but it is a lot of times cheaper to get somebody back on track than it is to replace them and hire somebody completely new, right? It's no different than following up with a lead versus calling a new lead. If you have a follow-up, you kind of know what you have. And is it perfect? Probably not, or else it would have already gotten sold, right? But when you call that new lead, yes, it's new, but it could be, an IS 99 with a DUI and not qualify at all, right? So it's the same idea here. Having a low kind of performer that, maybe has hit goals in the past, but has fallen off is a known quantity, and you can get them back on track, okay? So let's dive in. Let's talk about performance improvement plans. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is what PIPs are not, okay? PIPs are not a couple of things. And the first one is they are not an excuse to fire somebody. A lot of times, the perspective of the employee is that when they get put on a performance improvement plan, it's only a matter of time before they're fired. It's just an excuse for the business owner or HR to fire them, right? Like that is the pervasive thought that comes into this. Like I'll be on the internet, I'll be on Facebook, or I'll be on Reddit or any of these social media. And, it's a lot of times kind of anti-work out there. And, there's a whole subreddit called anti-work, and it's just jaded employees, right? People who've been jaded over time. And as business owners, we can say it's this generation, they don't want to work or they don't want to do this or that. But I think we are doing ourselves a disservice if that's the approach that we take, right? I think people do want to work. I think people do want meaning. I think people do want to make money. But I do think that a lot of people have had very bad experiences with employers and are jaded and no longer trust their employer, right? So PIPs are an opportunity for us to change the narrative there. When we talk to somebody and put them on a performance improvement plan at Peachy Insurance, what we always tell them is, hey, this performance improvement plan is not an excuse to fire you. We only hire in at-will states. And when we are in an at-will state, what that means is that we are in an at-will agreement, right? We can fire you at any time. You can quit at any time. We do not need a performance improvement plan to fire you. We are using a performance improvement plan to try and get you back on track. If we didn't want you here, we would just ask you to leave today. That is not what's happening, okay? So it is not an excuse to fire someone. Some states might not be an at-will state, and maybe you do need a performance plan, but most are an at-will state, and you do not need a PIP to fire people in most cases. So I think it's important to make that distinction as we dive in, okay? Another thing that PIPs are not is they are not one-sided. I think sometimes when people roll out performance improvement plans, they say, look, here's the deal. Here's what's got to change. Here's everything I need from you. Here's all the things that you need to do, blah, 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 blah. And how do you think that employee takes that? they probably don't take it very well, right? Like it's meant to be collaborative. We want to make sure that when we are trying to address a problem, we actually get the person to acknowledge that there is a problem. And if all we're doing is saying that they are the problem, whether that is true or not, it is probably going to make them put their walls up. They're probably going to stop listening. And the likelihood of them having success on the performance improvement plan gets to be pretty low. And even if they are successful, trust is likely lost, right? So a PIP should be collaborative. It should be a two-sided conversation. I can say, look, Susan, here's what I need out of you. But what do you need out of me, right? Like what can I do to help you be successful? Because I want you here. I want you back on track, okay? So PIPs are not an excuse to fire someone. They're not one-sided either. It's not a power play for us, right? It is an opportunity to bring people to the table and have a real conversation, okay? So that's the next thing that PIPs are not. The third thing is PIPs are not an excuse to micromanage. I think sometimes people get put on a PIP because that employer does actually want to fire them and they feel like they can't. And they use it as an excuse to micromanage them and nitpick every little thing that they do. It is not an excuse to do that. It is a way to have a conversation. Here's where you are. Here's where you need to be. Here's what needs to change. And here's how we get there. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit about how we check in on the next slide, but it is not an excuse to micromanage. Okay. It is not going to be a good experience. If you're micromanaging them, they are probably just going to quit. And if they're just going to quit, why are we doing a PIP in the first place, right? So let's ask ourselves that question and let's make sure that when we use a PIP, we're doing it for the right reasons. If we're not doing it for the right reasons, why are we wasting our time? Again, if you're in a state where you feel like you need it from a legal perspective, this is not legal advice, okay? It's not legal advice. But again, most states are at will states, all right? But let's flip it on its head, okay? PIPs are a couple of things, right? Like what are they? So they are an opportunity to give an employee a reality check, but they're also an opportunity for the employee to give us, the employer, a reality check as well. That is why we want to have a two-sided conversation. Sometimes we might think that the employee is not doing everything that they're supposed to be doing. They're not hitting goals. They're not hitting activity. But if we haven't taken the time to stop and say, well, what's stopping you from doing that? We might not even realize all of the responsibilities on their plate. So by having a two-sided conversation and saying, you know what, like, here's what I need out of you. What do you need from me to make sure you're successful? It opens the door for everybody to get a reality check and say, look, these are the things that have to change. And if we change these things, we can all be so much more successful, right? So they are a reality check. The next thing that PIPs are an opportunity to set boundaries, okay? I hear a lot of people say you get what you tolerate. I hear people talk about that on Facebook all the time. And right, really what we're talking about there are boundaries. We're talking about boundaries. And so if somebody is constantly tardy, if somebody is constantly calling out, a PIP is an opportunity to say, look, this behavior is not acceptable, and this is what needs to change. We're setting a boundary with a piece of paper, whether physical or digital, that needs a signature, that we have a boundary that has been crossed and we need to get those boundaries to be respected again. Okay. So it is a reality check. It is an opportunity to practice boundaries. And the other thing that PIPs are an opportunity to enhance your culture. Okay. They're an opportunity to enhance your culture. And it does two things when we take these performance plans seriously. One, it shows the rest of the team that accountability is important, because when we have a low performer and we just let them continue to perform at a low level, why should the high performers feel like they need to do the same thing? Why should they bust it day in and day out if we're going to let somebody else just kind of like skirt on by, right? So by protecting your culture and protecting your standards and holding everybody to them, it enhances your culture, especially a culture of performance. The other thing that it does is when you give people PIPs and you help them succeed, it shows the rest of the team that a PIP does not mean a death sentence, okay? And so what I'm not saying is go out and tell everybody that, Jason or John or Julia are on a PIP. That's not what we say. But if somebody else goes on a PIP in the future and Jason or Julia or John got off a PIP in the past, you can bet like hell I'm going to tell Frank, the new guy on the PIP, look, some of your peers have been on PIPs in the past. They took the advice. They did the work. I helped them because they asked me for help. They got on track and now they're killing it, right? So you create a culture of development and performance, okay? So I wanted to start there, and now let's go to the next slide. there are, 4 or 5 things you got to do to present a PIP well. Okay. The first thing we got to do is we got to set the tone. Okay. So when you bring somebody in, especially if HR is there or you have a witness there, their guard immediately goes up. They probably think they're being fired. And so the first thing you can just say is, look, I'm going to be upfront with you and be direct. We're here to talk about a performance improvement plan today. That does not mean that you're getting fired. And what I want you to know is that I want you here and I want you to be successful. And that's why we're doing this. I don't want you to quit. I don't want you to get fired. I want us to have a very serious but brief conversation and get on track. Okay. So set the tone, set the intention. The next thing that we want to do is be collaborative, right? Like I said, it's here's the problem. Here's where we need to go. What do you need from me to make sure that you're successful? Is anything bogging you down that I can get rid of? And then you have an opportunity as the employer or the leader or the manager to say, here's what I need from you. Your activity is not there. Or I need you, if you're not at your goal, you need you to work 30 minutes later or start a little bit earlier, right? Again, make sure you check your laws, right? I use JustWorks. It's a great PEO. If you want an introduction, let me know. But I always consult with my HR expert over there, right? And they'll tell me, yes, you can do that, or no, you can't, or this state has this rule or that, right? But be collaborative. If they take part in the process of creating the goals, they're going to be more bought in on them, okay? The third thing we want to do is build a roadmap for success, right? So if we want somebody's, production to go from 40 items to 60 items, well, we need to show them how they get there. We need to show them, here's what you need to do to get there, okay? You have to make it clear or they're not going to get it. Third, we need to create a timeline. A PIP can be 30 days. It can be 60 days. I have had ones in the past that were 30 days on performance for production. I've had ones in the past where 90 days because somebody kept coming in tardy. And basically we had to say, it's look, if you're going to continue to come in tardy, you're now on a PIP, your job is at risk. If you call in tardy one time in the next 90 days, either your job is gone or we're cutting your pay or we're changing your hours or whatever, right? A PIP does not have to mean termination. It could mean job reassignment. It could mean hours. It could mean position. It can mean all types of things, right? The last thing we want to do is do check-ins weekly. So if we do a 30-day or a 60-day PIP, don't wait 30 days. Do weekly check-ins with milestones. Are they on pace? Okay. Because if somebody is just going to basically quietly quit and just stop working, you don't want to wait 4 weeks to be done with it, right? So we say, look, are you on pace? Are we making progress? Are people bought in, right? But what that also does is it prevents you from checking in every day, right? We don't want to micromanage. So you have that weekly check-in to check in and make sure things are good, all right? So these are the ways you present a PIP well. And it's important to talk about the next slide, which is the habit loop, right? A lot of people have read the book Atomic Habits. And basically what it talks about is a habit is a couple things, right? You get a cue, then you have your routine, then a reward. And really what we're trying to do with a PIP is establish new, better, more productive habits. So people, or break old habits, right? And so understanding how habits form or how we break habits can be really, really important. There's a cue, then we go through our routine, and then you get a reward. Sometimes that's money, sometimes that's food, sometimes it's just pure dopamine, right? Just dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit. Why are people on TikTok left and right? Dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit, right? Every time they laugh, they get shocked, they get surprised. That's why people love TikTok, okay? The last thing here, just to kind of bring this whole idea home is, we want to talk about safeguards and how we move forward on a PIP, okay? So the idea is to create a bedrock or a foundation for success. And we do that by building the right habits or breaking the wrong habits like we just talked about, okay? But a couple things to note here. We use a 12-month rule at PG Insurance, which means that you are not able to be on a PIP 2 times in 12 months. If you're on a PIP, my balloons are going off. If you are on a PIP and you become eligible for a PIP again in 12 months, most of the time we just terminate you. And that's what it says in the PIP. Because what we're not going to do here is we're not going to see low performance, put you on a PIP, that number comes up, and then as soon as you're not being held accountable, it drops right back down, right? We need to tell people their goals and let them self-manage. People don't want to be micromanaged. We don't want to micromanage them, right? So we need to set up a foundation for success. 12-month rule prevents 2 PIPs in 12 months. Next, again, build lasting habits and lasting success. Ideally, the person is engaged in this process and they use this as an opportunity to have more conversations, get more help from you, and talk to you when they're struggling. I think that 90% of the agents out there would be fine if somebody was busting their tail and cared and were good for culture, but failing. Almost all of us can work with somebody like that or find a spot for somebody like that, whether that's in our agency or somebody else's, right? What we can't deal with is somebody who's not trying and failing, right? The effort has to be there. Third is share wins and stories, right? I already talked about this, but if you have PIP success stories, use those in the future, right? Ask that employee's permission if they're okay with you sharing that story, because it is good for culture, okay? The last thing here, or two more things. One is consider a reward. And I'm not saying you should give them a bunch of money because they got off of their PIP, right? But like maybe you say like, look, you get off this PIP, like I'll pay for you to get your nails done, or I'll pay for you to go get a massage or something, right? Because maybe they had to work extra hours. Maybe they really were stressed out, right? Let them know that you are an advocate for them. You don't have to spend a ton of money. You don't have to reward quote unquote bad behavior. You're rewarding good behavior, right? When we talked about that habit loop, cue, routine, reward, right? So let's stick to that. And the last thing, right, is if you want our PIP template, just shoot me a reply to this newsletter or this email. I'm happy to share it with you. It's not proprietary, but basically you have the roadmap of how to lay it out. And so that is how we use PIPs in our agency. That is how you use a PIP well. We've probably had 10, 20 employees in the last 5 to 7 years get on PIPs, and probably 70% of them have made it off their PIPs and had lasting success. That is something I'm incredibly proud of. I'm very proud of our managers for that, because I'm not the one holding those employees accountable. The managers, the leaders of the agency are. And that is a testament to their ability to invest in their people. Okay. So I hope this was helpful. As always, I want to bring you value. Do you have any thoughts, questions, feedback? I always love to hear it. Shoot me a reply to the email. Until next week, thanks so much.